Hi, it's Mike with smsbf. I hope all is well with you and your loved ones. smsbf is the Sustainable Triple Bottom Line Business Forum in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. We are the marketplace for sustainable triple bottom line business ideas and content. Today we're with two guests who are making a difference in Detroit and across the state. One is the co-founder of a social enterprise and the other is a workforce development policy expert. In this webinar, we'll be looking at what it's like to run a social enterprise and the role policy plays in bringing about greater justice and equity in the workforce system. Meaningful work is a fundamental human necessity. All of the created order is oriented toward work of some kind, whether it's a single-celled bacterium or a complex and highly developed and evolved human being. Everything in nature has a purpose. One could argue that much of this age's social unrest is rooted in this primordial human need for meaningful work. In the U.S. in particular, we see grotesque injustices in the workforce. Many of us are unemployed, underemployed, underpaid, overworked, and without the social safety nets many other developed countries have implemented. Fortunately, compassionate people are fighting for justice in the workforce, and today we'll talk with two who are dedicating themselves to building justice in Michigan's workforce system. Welcome to the SMSBF's webinar series. I'm Mike Shesterkin, the Executive Director of the SMSBF, and today's session is titled Workforce Development and the Social Enterprise. We have with us today Jarrett Schlaff of Pingree, Detroit. And Pingree is a manufacturer of fine leather goods and is focused on providing meaningful work to our veterans. And from the Michigan League of Public Policy, we have Peter Ruark, who's worked extensively within the workforce development realm, and in particular on advancing sound public policy supporting Michigan's workforce. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Indeed. And it's great to have you guys here. Very much appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to join us for this, and what will hopefully be a very insightful and interesting time together. I don't think it would be appropriate to go any further without recognizing the fact that we are in the midst of an extremely unprecedented time for all of us, and what could become a very difficult time for even the folks that are on the call tonight. I just want to recognize and let everyone know that on behalf of the SMSBF, that our prayers and thoughts are with everyone in our community and around the world as we make our way through this. And I always think that the key is that there will be another side to this, that, you know, that all will come to an end and things will, get back to some sense of normalcy. And I think it's important that we just take one day at a time and keep focused on that. So, but know that, our hearts and minds are out and prayers are with everyone. I think, as I said earlier, what we'll do is, if there are any questions from the audience, we'll just put those on the chat box, keep track of those, and then we'll come back to those toward the end of the webinar. But for now, I'd like to just go over. So our goal this evening is to explore the intersection between the social enterprise and public policy. We'd like to uncover insights into what it will take to level the playing field and build greater equity into the system of economics in Detroit, and in particular the Southeast Michigan region. So what I'd like to do is just get started with a little bit of background and allow Jarrett and Peter to do a bit of a self-introduction and speak about the work that they're doing. And we'll start with Jarrett. Just kind of give us an elevator pitch, but you can take a little bit more time than the typical elevator ride. So, Jarrett,
of course.
So tell us a little bit about Pingree Detroit, what motivated you to get started, its mission, and what you're doing and that sort of thing.
Of course. So thanks again, Michael. It's good to connect with you, Peter, and to all those that have tuned in. Thank you for making time in this evening to be with us, to explore, to create with us. We are all literally in this together. So it's truly a privilege to be on this call and to share a bit about our journey and kind of explore some of these intersections. So Pingree Detroit, we actually just turned 5 years old. So as Michael mentioned, we are both a sustainable design and leather goods manufacturing company. We do more than work with just leather, but all of our leather is actually upcycled. So we use brand new leather that was otherwise being destined for the landfill or shipped overseas from the Detroit auto industry. And we take that and we turn it into things like the first sneakers ever made in Detroit. We turn it into products like backpacks and wallets. But really what we're creating is the products, of course, speak for themselves, but we're working to create neighborhood resiliency. We exist to create meaningful living wage work for veterans and Detroiters. And so we started with that idea in mind of, what can we do to create stronger neighborhoods? We started working with folks that were overcoming a lot of adversity, from homelessness to unemployment. And we started with the idea, the concept of how can we create something different? I often look at, this moment in the clock of the world. And in this current age, we're experiencing exponential increase in consolidation, mechanization, automation, arguably exploitation and globalization. And so we've got to do business differently. Too many workers are being left behind. Too many workers are being displaced. And so if we don't think 5, 10, 20 years down the line, if we don't put workers right there equal to profit, then a lot of folks will be left out. And a lot of folks that are the backbone of what makes America, America, as well as globally, will now have the same opportunities and access that truly is the part and the bedrock of what makes our country great. So we exist to create those circumstances. We exist to inspire people, to offer products that are solutions, and truly try and offer some alternatives to their current status quo.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jarrett. That's outstanding. And by the way, I just wanted to say you guys make a really, really cool and beautiful product. I love the tennis shoes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good stuff. And congratulations on making it 5 years. It's cool.
Thank you, Michael.
Peter, if you would, then please kind of give us a little bit of your background. What your work is like, and a little bit longer than the typical elevator pitch.
Okay. And I just realized I don't need to have my reading glasses for this, so people can see who I really look like. But yeah, I just want to say I'm really impressed with what your company is doing, Jarrett. So thanks for that. The Michigan League for Public Policy, we've been around for, I guess it would be 108 years this fall. 108 years. We are an established organization, not with that name necessarily for the entire time, of course. In fact, we just changed our name at our 100th anniversary in 2012. It was Michigan League for Human Services prior to that, and it was called the Michigan Conference on Charities and Corrections at one point, the Michigan Welfare League at one point. All these names that kind of reflected the language of the times that they were in. But our mission is to advocate for public policy that helps low-income people in the state of Michigan. And we do believe that work is the best way out of poverty for those who are able to do it. And that means physically and mentally able, of course, but also, when there are jobs around, etc. We do like to see people get skills for work. We like to see people move up the income scale, through work. But, a lot of times, unfortunately, work doesn't pay very well. A lot of times, there are people who are working full-time who still can't get their needs met. So, we like to advocate for policies that can help working families and working individuals, stay above water and thrive. And so, that's kind of what brought me into this whole field of workplace policies that help work to pay. And, so we've advocated for various policies to help that, both on the workplace end, job quality and things like that, but also skills training, adult education, post-secondary education. Even we're advocating for some of the barriers to people who have left the corrections system in getting licenses and certificates. We'd like to see some of those barriers removed. So that's why I'm here. these are topics that mean a lot to me.
Great. Thank you, Peter. That's and I think we can see that. I think having this conversation between the two of you is a great opportunity, as we'd said at the outset, to explore that space, right? What does that look like? So I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation this evening. I'm going to go back to Jarrett for a moment. Jarrett, I understand that Pingree Detroit is an L3C. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and how that works?
Of course. So when we first started out, again, we didn't start with a traditional product or service or even a business. We started out literally, one of the veterans I met early on this was the fall of 2014. And I met a gentleman who was living out of his car. He was a veteran, had a master's in engineering, and actually employed him to do a listening campaign when we were trying to determine, what can we do? Instead of assuming we knew best, we actually worked with Michael, and we went and sat down with veterans nonprofits. We sat down with service organizations, veterans themselves, veterans in shelters, workforce development folks, and asked the question, what do you need? Where are the gaps? What can we do to support? I thought maybe it was going to be a fundraiser. I didn't think it was going to turn into a design and manufacturing business. But the common consistent theme was this gap between provision of basic needs and then meaningful living wage work. And in the place that put the world on wheels, we decided, we can do something. We can create work right here. And in deciding on a business and deciding on shoes, which is, I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. We haven't done shoes and footwear in Detroit since 1953, before Pingree Detroit came along. And so when we started with the model, the L3C was an attempt to infuse impact and social impact and actually a quadruple bottom line into everything we do. So not only are we maximizing the environment, the well-being of the workforce, the well-being of the business with profitability, but we also infuse into that how we involved in the broader community. How are we making a difference alongside our neighbors, from the products we create as far as using non-toxic components, so we're not off-gassing something on a neighborhood, or the end of life cycle of something. It's not just ending up in some landfill and polluting some person's backyard. We really want to take everything into account. And so we chose an L3C as a model that in our operating agreement, in our articles of organization, it states that we are equally balancing profit with social impact. So we're a low profit entity according to the federal government. Frankly, if I was going to do it all over again, I'd probably pursue something closer to like a B Corp, because still the idea of an L3C is so just alien to most folks that even lenders don't really know what to do with it. They're like, wait, well, you're not a nonprofit, but you're not a for-profit. I don't want to touch this. So it actually kind of backfired in some ways, but that's why we chose an L3C.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thanks. So let's see. I maybe just want to jump right into this one then with you, Peter. One of the things that we had talked about when we first got connected here was the Michigan's Owner's Manual. And I kind of wanted to jump in there a little bit and talk. I know one of the pages that we had, or that I think you'd put together, was Pave the Way for Better Jobs. And there were a number of things on that document that I think may be appropriate to speak to right now, just to kind of get into a little bit of the specifics of the work that the MLPP is doing to, advance a bit more justice in the workplace. Would you like to pick it up from there and talk a little bit about what it looks like?
Sure. Yeah. One thing that I'll start off with is, we do believe that when workers work more than 40 hours, they should be eligible for overtime. There are some high-paying jobs where, people work a lot more than 40 hours a week, but the pay kind of makes up for it. And those kinds of workers usually have quite a bit of job flexibility where they can, if they really decide they want to limit it to 40, they probably have quite a few choices out there. We're thinking more of the the lower paid workers that have titles like assistant manager or or even manager, but are not getting paid very much. Up until very recently, the overtime threshold, the level at which a worker could work without without getting the overtime protections. Up until very recently, it was $23,700 a year. So just think about that. Think about how far $23,700 a year salary, or even a bit over that. Think of how tight your family must be if that's all you're earning. And yet, if you have a title like assistant manager, you actually would not need to be paid overtime. Now, that was changed recently by the Trump administration. There was a proposal it was actually an executive order by the Obama administration to raise it to $50,400 a year. So $50,000 a year. If you earn above $50,004 a year, then you don't necessarily have to be paid overtime. But if you earn below that, then you would be entitled to overtime no matter what your position is. That was the Obama rule change. That was held up in court because some state AGs contested it, including our then state attorney general, Bill Schuette, had contested it. So it never went into effect. President Trump, to his credit, raised it to $30,000 a year. So now it is in place. If you earn more than $30,000 a year, you are not entitled to overtime, but everything below that is. So we're happy there was a change, but we are especially happy that Governor Whitmer, with some encouragement from organizations like mine, we did talk with her staff soon after she was elected. She is exploring ways to bring the overtime threshold closer to what it would be had the Obama rule gone into effect. So that would be roughly about between 51 and 55. But there isn't a threshold set yet because the governor is speaking with business groups, labor groups, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one, I guess that was a little long-winded. That's one issue that we're working on right now. Non-compete agreements. That's another issue. I testified before a House subcommittee on that very recently. If you're a high-paid worker and you have a job where you actually have clients, you have proprietary information, yes, it makes sense that those organizations would require you to sign a non-compete agreement saying that you can't go and work for a similar business in the same community, right after leaving. But what really astounded me was when we learned that a lot of low-paid workers, fast food workers and retail workers who are not earning a whole lot more than minimum wage are having to sign those. And there's only one reason for that rule for a low-paid worker. I mean, the McDonald's employee is not going to go across the street to Burger King and divulge the special sauce recipe. I mean, they low-paid workers don't have so much access to proprietary information, and if they do, they could sign a confidentiality agreement. It doesn't have to be a non-compete agreement. So we believe that the only reason that low-paying jobs have non-compete agreements is to make it more difficult for them to seek either better pay or better hours or better work conditions. So we're battling that too. Paid sick leave is another issue that we are very big on, and in this time of coronavirus, we're really seeing it as a public health issue. A lot of workers do not have paid sick leave, and they're feeling pressure to go into work because they can't lose their wages. Of course, now the virus is getting bad enough where some governors are stepping in and closing, for example, restaurants and bars, and our governor did that to her credit. But there are some states where people have to keep going into work because they don't have paid sick leave. They're interacting with the public, and they can't afford to lose their job or lose, a large number of hours.
Thank you indeed, Peter. Jared, I was as Peter was explaining the initiatives that the MLPP is working on, I was thinking about your role as a business leader and what you're doing at Pingree and payroll and all that. What are your thoughts about some of the things that Peter was going over there?
Yeah, so I share his enthusiasm for implementing even support systems around supporting small businesses, to implement things like paid leave, to implement maternity leave, paternity leave, insurance benefits. There are so many opportunities, but especially when you're first starting out, we can't afford to offer, if we offer 2 weeks sick leave and we only have, we're sometimes going pay period to pay period, we're waiting to have demand come in for products to be able to make sure we can keep the doors open. We sometimes don't have more than 3 months worth of operating cash flow. And some businesses are week to week, right? So having state and federal governments step in and support, I think is of critical importance. We have folks on our team that should have that safety net. Although we aim to pay a living wage, when folks first start out, they might only be making $13.50, and it might take them a while to get up to $20 an hour or $30 an hour. And so if you, by no fault of your own, get sick and you're out for a couple of weeks, I have members of my team that have overcome a lot of adversity and are living paycheck to paycheck. They're working through overcoming debt. We often don't understand or fully grasp the stress that it causes folks when they're living paycheck to paycheck, and when they don't have a support system outside of their own self, right? And when you're providing that for your family as well, it's a lot of unnecessary stress. Whereas I think it's the role of government to help support and create those safety nets, to support small businesses, to provide and expand that access.
Yeah. And could I say, I really agree with you too. And a well-constructed paid leave law would, take into account some of those things. I know some states have paid leave laws where they exempt businesses with, for example, under 10 employees, so the really small businesses that are going to really feel that that kind of thing, they try to have some protections there. But I always consider public policy to be the art of the possible, and the challenges. And especially if you can get politics out of it, which you can't always do. But the challenge is how can people come together and devise a policy that will protect workers, but also not totally stick it to small businesses, because I believe our economy thrives on small businesses. I try to support small local businesses personally anytime I can. And so I can hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that as a business, you believe it's, important for government to be involving itself with some of those things.
And I guess that's so. Are there any? Again, coming back to what Jared's talking about, and that's the trouble with small businesses and just trying to keep the doors open and running week to week or paycheck to paycheck and not having enough cash reserves to especially like right now. I'm sure there's businesses out there that are going to struggle or really looking at what does it look like on the other end. So Peter, what are there any? I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any insights around what sort of mechanisms, and to go back to your point about the art of the possible, are there states in the in the country that are, you'd kind of mentioned one or two that are, exempted the small business, but are there any that are looking at raising the revenue to help the small businesses so that they can cover these gaps? Are there any models out there that that you could speak to that are that at that level of progressiveness, if you will?
Yeah, I don't know of any. There might be some. And I do want to say, too, that it's not just states that are passing paid sick leave, but there are also some municipalities that have done it as well. We can't do that in Michigan on the municipal level because there's a preemption law that prevents counties and cities from passing ordinances governing the workplace, basically. So like minimum wage and paid sick leave and things like that. But there are some cities in other states that have it. But yeah, that would be something to look into. I wish I could say right off the top of my head if there are models where there is some public support, some public financial support for small businesses who find themselves in hard times when that paid sick leave is used. One thing to point out too is that most employees don't use like the bulk of their paid sick leave. It's a form of insurance. And there are, admittedly, there are some employees, unfortunately, that might abuse it. But, in terms of like the ballot proposal that was headed to the ballot a couple years ago would have required up to 70 paid sick hours, depending on how many hours an employee worked for the larger businesses, but only 40 for the smaller businesses. And, most people don't use up that much sick time. It's just there as insurance. And actually what we have now in Michigan is we do have a paid sick leave law that is only for employers with more than 50 employees, and that's a 40 days that it requires. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, not 40 hours.
No worries. So, Jared, coming back to the work you're doing at Pingree and this, it sounds like the business is growing fairly well.
Yeah. So, of course, for every business right now, it's challenging times, and we have to get very creative and kind of go to where the demand is. So, shifting out some of the products we're making and working to work more collaboratively and do some cross-branding with some corporate partners. But I would love to build on one of the elements that Peter was talking about. It's a little bit of a kind of I would say it goes alongside one of the elements that he was speaking of. And when I think about other states and what other innovators are doing, especially from a public policy perspective, if you look to some things that are happening in California and New York, especially around creating more clusters of connection for small businesses, there are talent pools. There are a lot more connections to where if you are in the skilled trades and you are looking for opportunity for part-time work, for gig work, for full-time work, they put a lot of time and investments into connecting folks with those resources, those connections, both from a kind of a worker first perspective, but also for the business side. I know it's excellent at Michigan. We have the Michigan Talents. If you go to, I think it's michigantalent.org. I could go and I could look through workers' resumes. I can search by skill set. I can identify people's interest level and actually directly recruit from that website, which is great. But what it doesn't do, it does not on the back end allow workers, I think, as much of a flexibility to connect with each other. And it doesn't allow businesses to understand what other businesses are in the same lane, where could we collaborate with these folks over here and utilize their waste stream. It took me 8 meetings and going out there myself to kind of create the connection that I made. Not, I used to work for the state of Michigan in the Office of Pollution Prevention, and what now exists is a waste sharing initiative that is providing some of that access. But I think there's such an opportunity for governments to look and ask the question, what's going to directly make a difference for the worker and for the business, and how can we work in tandem? And so, when we think about skilled trades training funds, it's come and gone and come and gone. I know they're just now opening up another round where they both provide businesses with up to $500 a month for the training purposes and for reimbursing businesses for employing especially workers that are at risk of different circumstances in certain communities across the state. And so, like, if you're in Detroit, if you're in Flint, if you're in Pontiac, and you're a small business, you can get reimbursed $500 per employee as long as they're working full time and they're paid over $11.50 an hour. And the flip side, what they provide to the worker is they're providing them funds. They're giving them gas reimbursement. They're giving them, they help offset cell phone bills. If they need a work uniform, they're covering the cost of the work uniform. They're even going as far as to help offset some of the cost of actually the insurance for their car. And so, as well as wraparound services from coaching to mental health. So that's a project of the MEDC, of the state of Michigan. It's a kind of a public-private partnership, as well as businesses on the task force. And so, to me, those kind of innovative ways of identifying, well, every small business would love to be able to invest more in training dollars. And with this fund, it incentivizes taking unskilled and turning them into skilled workers. And I think more programs like that, I know for me, if I could have more investment coming into developing the people on my team, as we talked early on in the conversation, supporting the upward mobility, investing in people on my team who are bought in, I think it makes a world of difference. And, if you zoom back 5 years ago, if there would have been seed funding at a state level, even $5,000 to generate your concept, to develop it more, there'd be a lot more social entrepreneurs who are passionate but don't really know how they're going to get that first thing started. And if you succeed at that 5K, maybe there's a grant that's available for 15 to do proof of concept, your first prototype. And then maybe from there, you can then go to a Detroit Development Fund or to an impact investment partner who would actually take a risk on you and invest $50,000 to get the thing started. So I think it's an opportunity to really be intentional around meeting the needs of small businesses, especially those that have a triple bottom line.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that insight around the idea of the state coming in there and, giving that initial seed money to a triple bottom line or social entrepreneurial business idea, spot on to what you guys are doing at Pingree, to get that go to propagate that idea more and seed it, right? So maybe on that note, I mean, I'm like vaguely familiar with the money that the state puts out there for training. Are you able to take advantage of those resources, Jarrett?
So one of them, I think every entrepreneur friend in my circle, especially I'm connected with, folks like Rebel Nell and the Empowerment Plan, Detroit Denim, the York Project, and just to name a few, that also have a social impact lens, whether most of those are all for-profits. One of the biggest challenges is that funding aspect, especially state funding or federal funding, mostly doesn't exist. There are training funds, but it's always connected to, if you do the training first, then potentially get reimbursed if you hit all these different metrics. And it's so cumbersome, there's so much red tape, and it's such a small amount that if in the first place we can't even afford to hire them, then we can't afford to train them for me, it's like 10 weeks of training to get someone learning the art of shoemaking. I can't invest, $7,000 in somebody without really investing in them first and developing them as an employee. So I think there are funds out there, but they're small. The fund I just mentioned, the Skilled Trades Training Fund, it's changed names so many times, it might be named something different now. They're just rolling it out again because it lost funding, got funding, changed hands. So there's also a little bit of the challenge on consistency from the state level, which is no fault of their own. It's changing administrations, changing priorities, right? And so for us, we have participated in that in the past, but yeah, it's definitely been hard. Pingree didn't start. Literally, we didn't start with investments. We started with we got $15,000 from a crowdfunding campaign. I took all my savings from the last 3 careers I'd had since I graduated college in 2010, and that was about 10 grand that I put into the company, and then we had close to, what was it, almost 300 individuals gave us $5, $10, $20 when we first started. If we could have gone an easier path to get first seed funding, and then having guidance, having the ability to bring on expertise at an early level, it would have drastically advanced and expanded the impact we could have made starting out.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Peter, any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, it's all sounding really impressive, and I want to reiterate that I think investing in small businesses is a very good thing for the government to be doing. And with the coronavirus situation now, I worry that a lot of small businesses are going to be really hurt by this. And so, when we see the state budgets, the federal budgets for relief for all of this, I don't want to see a whole bunch of money thrown at larger businesses, corporations, if you will, that can weather this out. I really want to see some help given to the smaller businesses, because that really should be the priority.
Indeed, there was. I think I was on LinkedIn earlier today, and there's a woman I connected with. She's on the east side of the country in the New York area. Is a very big proponent of. I'm actually small scale manufacturing. If there's a term for it, it escapes me right now. But she had posted something about that, and about this idea that where the funding is going to go, and this notion that it ought to go to the too big to fail idea. And I agree with you. I think it's inappropriate, especially I think to be brutally honest, the work that Jarrett's doing at Pingree and Veronica Scott over at the Empowerment Project, Rebel Now, those are the models of business that we need to grow and nurture and advance, because they speak to the things that Jarrett spoke to at the beginning when he did his introduction, right? Is that we need to be doing these things that provide meaningful work for people here locally. And if we're not supporting that, then we're missing the boat, because ultimately the large corporations are seeking ways of automating work and displacing more workers, and that's not what we should be encouraging. So I couldn't agree with you more on that point. And maybe on that note, I know I had read, I think somewhere, Jarrett, where in an article I think you did with the Metro Times, where we talked a little bit about that, or you did, this idea that there, for lack of a better way of putting it, we have a system that's evolved to favor the large corporations, right? So that the system, because they can afford the lobbyists in Washington, or what it takes to essentially get to the point where, for example, GE pays either zero or very little in taxes. They can invert the company and send it overseas, those sorts of things. What are there any thoughts around what could be done in that space, at least from like a policy perspective? I mean, I know that's kind of a loaded question, but I think this is a reality that we face, right? And notwithstanding the times we're in with the coronavirus and what's going on and what that'll look like, but I wanted to kind of throw that out there, and just to see, it's open to either one of you to speak to that. But this idea of a fair share, right? Like, are there any ideas around what we could do with the tax structure and that sort of thing that will open things up and make the playing field a little bit more level, if you will, for small businesses?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to speak to it. I'm sure Peter's got some thoughts too. So great question. I think starting out, if we look at the root of some of the challenges, the system itself, right? We have an economy that is based on a growth at all costs model. And so the notion of what could be sustainable to sustain an economy that grows exponentially on a planet with finite resources is lunacy, right? We can't just always grow and grow for the sake of growth, which is what currently our economy is doing and what businesses are doing. So we celebrate growth, which includes displacing workers, includes shutting factories down and moving them overseas to race to the bottom for wages so you can increase your profit share to your stockholders. So our current economy, our current system incentivizes exploitation. It incentivizes automation. We celebrate in the next 10 years when we put out hundreds of thousands of workers that drive trucks, that work in plants where they're currently celebrated for their labor, when in the future we'll automate that and call that progress. Because in a current system called capitalism, that's what it is. So I think looking to alternatives where we can implement measures that actually maximize well-being at the forefront, first and foremost, for the workers, for the community, for the environment, and for the business, then we can have an economy that works for all of us. We can have an economy that puts well-being first and allows us to thrive at a neighborhood level, at a community and state level. And the measures that will allow us to do that would look at things like us. As an example, we're one of many ideas around an alternative, but we are a worker-owned company, which means that we bring in innovation like automation, where right now we're working on a type of technology that will allow us to use completely upcycled materials, from upcycled leather to yarn to fabric that otherwise is going to get thrown away. We can literally create, using these machines, a shoe in minutes, where right now it takes us 2.5 days of hand making a pair. What that allows us to do is both create a completely closed loop system. So when that shoe is done, you've got literally an automated process with hundreds of needles creating it in front of your eyes. When that shoe has the end of life, we can literally break it down and literally reconstitute a new shoe. We can completely eliminate the waste stream. And so all those cost savings on the front end, all the environmental savings in the back end, in most traditional models, that means, well, you're gonna have to let go people, because look, you don't need 15 workers to do what you can do in a matter of hours. However, in our model, the workers are owning a part of that company. So we actually have a model where 77 cents of every dollar in profit is shared with the workers on our team. We have 14 cents that go back to the investors, and then 9 cents that's shared amongst the founder members. And so we created this model so that no matter how large we get, it's not just going towards the very top and just going to shareholders, but it's actually going amongst the workers. So if we innovate and bring forth a technology that would literally save us hundreds of hours in a given week, why not give the option of 30-hour work weeks or increased pay? Why not give an option to be more involved in community service and make offerings that are more affordable and accessible to neighbors? Why not contribute and be a part of that community that you depend on to be who you are and where you're at? So we can incentivize these ideas. We can support with policy, incentivizing businesses to do business better, businesses to be sustainable figuratively and literally, from how they use products to how they support their workers. So if you're an asshole, sorry for swearing on the webinar, and you are a fossil fuel company whose business model literally jeopardizes life on this planet, you probably shouldn't be subsidized, which they currently are, to the tune of some estimates, Oil Change International. It's like upwards of $50 billion a year when you include our presence with the military protecting assets. So we got to really get creative, and we should be incentivizing good business. We should incentivize putting the workers, the community, the business, and the sustainability at the forefront. So to me, maximize well-being instead of just profit, and we'll go a long way.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you, Jarrett. No, that's good. That's good.
I get passionate sometimes when I'm talking about this.
That's all right. That's good. No, I like that. A little bit of that. And swearing's okay. It's okay. Peter, what are your thoughts and takes on that? It's just what the work that you're trying to do to advance the public policy that and I completely agree with you. The art of the possible, right? So come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it seems like the art of the possible is such a long way off. But yeah, I agree with what Jarrett was saying, and I want to mention too this whole idea of large corporations paying very little or no taxes. That is, I'm not the tax policy analyst for the league, but we do have one, and we need solid revenues for the state and for the country, for that matter. Michigan needs to have a solid revenue system in order to keep the quality of life up. There's a certain amount that business and employment and everything can do to where people earn money and then they spend it, and that's all good, but we need the safety nets, we need the environmental protections, we need all of these things that cost money. And if we starve those programs, it unfortunately, I think larger corporations have the upper hand then, because small businesses are dependent on are more dependent on their employees' well-being. For example, the like Jarrett, you were saying, it costs about $7,000 to train somebody, and then you want them to stick around for a while, and you want them to do well, not be unhealthy, not have horrible things with their housing or whatever. So investing in the public good, investing in public services, common spaces, I think that's all good for small business too. It's all the public good, and so tax policy is a big area where we're not reaching anywhere what we could with that. The state of Michigan and the federal government seem to constantly be throwing in tax cuts, but are they targeted tax cuts? Are they tax cuts that will help the individuals and businesses who really benefit from them, or are they just broad-based, where, again, like you said, GE paying hardly any money in taxes? So when we have tax cuts, let's target them better. Let's make our tax system work for people and encourage entrepreneurship. For example, the seed money, the incentive money to get businesses like Jarrett's started up. We can't afford to do that if we throw away all our revenues on badly targeted tax cuts. So that's another good example of why we need solid revenues and we need smart tax policy.
Indeed, yeah, that's a great point, right? If we had the right amount of money flowing into the system that would allow us to nurture and grow the businesses that Jarrett's working on, these sorts of models, then there's and to Jarrett's point, worker owned, did you decide, well, why not work 30 hours and you'll have enough to give back to the community that you work in, to volunteer, to help out, to build up the common good in your community. I mean, that's a beautiful thing, right? Rather than having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to try to make ends meet. Which that kind of does bring me back to one thing, and the whole idea of a just and living wage and getting to the point where we pay that. Peter, you wrote an article. It was titled "A Wonkish Weapon Against the Poor: or How to Bury the Devil Deep in the Weeds," and I thought that was really a quite insightful piece. I was wondering if you might be able to comment on that work and what the implications are there of what I think you recall that article, eh?
Yeah, that was on our blog, the Michigan League for Public Policy blog, and that was that blog post was focused on how just one tiny little change can make a big negative difference. The topic of that blog was the proposal by the Trump administration to change the way poverty is calculated, and it would change the inflation tool that would be used to determine what the poverty thresholds should be. So, in other words, the poverty threshold would, each year, I trust everyone kind of knows how this works, but each year the poverty threshold rises a little bit to keep up with inflation. The poverty threshold is already too low. It's not really an indicator of need. There are people that are not considered officially poor by the federal government who are really struggling to make ends meet. So that's one thing. But then, using that different inflation calculator would just mean that the threshold would rise just a little more slowly, and that would mean that some people wouldn't be eligible for public services that would otherwise be eligible, because food assistance, cash assistance, Section 8 housing, those are all, a family's eligibility is calculated by how far they are from the poverty level. If you're in poverty or if you're below a certain percentage relative to poverty. For example, Medicaid used to be available to people only if they were below the actual poverty line. Then it got expanded to be 138% of the poverty line. So the poverty line and then 38% above that. Well, when that poverty line is not going to rise at the same rate because you do one wonky little thing and change the inflation calculator, that is going to have very real world effects for families who are struggling.
Yeah, I think we've got a few minutes left here. I think the thing that struck me about the article, and I think you alluded to that as well here earlier, and this obviously varies, but I mean, when we look at it in our region of the country, the thing that struck me about that was, what the United Way has done with their ALICE calculation, and, really looking at what that poverty definition is in the first place and how just those numbers are they're not realistic in terms of what a family has to go through that's trying to raise children, right? And
right.
That was the part that struck me, notwithstanding this little, to your point about this little tweak, so to speak, and how the numbers are calculated and gauging it to inflation and so forth. But more importantly was just where the number is to begin with. And the fact, it just doesn't,
Right. The poverty threshold was invented during Lyndon Johnson's term as president. A woman named Molly Orshansky devised it. She worked for the Johnson administration, and she devised it the best she could with the economic realities of the time, which were that a family spends about 1/3 of its income on food. And now, of course, we know food is quite cheap. It wasn't so cheap in the mid 1960s, but food actually has not grown in its price the way a lot of other things have. And but we're still kind of pegging it to the price of food. I mean, that's how it started. That's how it started, and now we're just pegging it to inflation. I shouldn't say we're pegging it to the price of food year after year now, but that's how it started. And so we started from a very low baseline relative to realities now. Back then, healthcare wasn't as expensive as it is now, and so the whole thing needs an overhaul. But you know what? No president is going to propose making the poverty threshold higher, because that will mean that the number of people who are officially poor will go way up, and no president wants to see the poverty numbers go up on his or her watch. I mean, that sounds like a very cynical way to put it, but it's kind of true.
Yeah, no, and that was I remember that point as well, and I think I the kind of maybe we're coming to the top of the hour now, and it doesn't look like we got a whole lot of questions here, but I did want to just bring that up because I thought as I was preparing, this is when you talk about a living wage and we talk about what can be done to provide that. And I think the three of us see the importance of work, and we obviously are not the only ones, but I think we value that, in the meaningful work that pays a just and living wage is primordially, that foundationally important, right? And if we look at what those numbers look like and what it means to get people into that space, we've got a lot of work to do, and I think that policy plays a tremendous role in that. To help with the work that folks like Jared are doing, and to redefine things like this, like what is a fair and living wage? What does that look like? How do we provide that? How do we ensure that when families are, mom and dad are working, they don't have to work two jobs to get by. They've got to have time to come home and be family with their children and participate in those sorts of things. So I think as maybe as we round it out, and I want to give you guys a chance to just make a few closing comments, but I think that really sort of is the place where we need to be focused, right? We need to know that getting engaged and involved in our government and what goes on and who our leadership is of primary importance. So anyways, I want to, maybe I'll go to Jarrett and just give you a chance to maybe have a few closing words, and then Peter, and then we'll wrap things up.
Of course. Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity, Michael. It's great to be on the call with you, Peter. Thank you for everyone tuning in. I would say that to just build on the point you just mentioned, the folks over at Fight for 15 have been doing amazing work, organizing with and alongside restaurant workers who are making a minimum wage. It should be $15 an hour. If you're a certain size business, I think it's critically important to identify what is the level that people actually need to make to live well, and then to organize and to figure out how we can have our businesses, small and large, meet that wage so that we're taking care of our neighbors and we're not in the scenario that we currently are, where people have to work 2-3 jobs, where they're not able to support their families without stressing to the max. That's not what we're living here for, right? To either, the idea of making a living versus working to live, right? I think there is a stark difference.
Yeah.
And I'm committed to personally be working towards making a living and making a living wage, and reimagine what it means, right? We often say we not only have to pay a living wage, but to reimagine what it means to wage a living. And so I would say thank you for hosting us, and it's on behalf of Pingree Detroit, I invite folks to check us out at PINGREE Detroit.com to check out our offerings. Everything goes directly to the people who make them. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be on the call with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, and real quick, a plug too. It's cool stuff. I highly recommend going out and taking a look at it. You guys are making some really cool stuff. I love it.
Thank you.
Peter?
Well, I've enjoyed this call. Thank you. I'd just like to let anyone else on the call know that you can find out more about our organization if you go to www.MLPP, Michigan League for Public Policy, MLPP.org. We work on healthcare issues. We work on public assistance, training, the so-called workforce development. That's one of my areas. Post-secondary ed, K through 12, children's issues, housing, anything that has to do with helping low-income people in Michigan try to get ahead.
Great. And and a plug for MLPP. You got some great stuff out there. There's great content on the website, very insightful writing. And I want to, real shout out for you, Peter. I love your work and I love what you're writing about. And you got some great stuff on the website there. So keep up the good work, and folks check that out. And I want to just extend a really deep sense of appreciation and thanks for you guys taking your time out to be with us this evening. I think it was a great call. Hope to do it again here sometime in the not too distant future. So thanks again, and take care, everyone. That's it for now. Don't forget to check us out at smsbf.org and sign up for our newsletter. You can also support the SMSBF by either making a donation, volunteering, or by supporting our sponsors and buying their Triple Bottom Line products and services. Contact us through our website or by calling 734-464-8353.